Hello and welcome to Nourishing Families with Plant-Powered Nutrition. My name is Leanna Levine-Reisner, and I'm the Network Director of PlantPowered Metro New York. PlantPowered Metro New York supports our communities both in the New York metro area and, of course, here online across the world with learning about and supporting the transition to a more plant-based lifestyle so that we can treat, prevent, and even sometimes reverse chronic disease using food as medicine. Our mission is focused on plant-based nutrition due to the wonderful array of evidence supporting eating plants. And sometimes the hardest conversations that we have are with families, wondering, how do I help my children to eat healthier? We have so many things in our culture that are about unhealthy food as staples, whether it's birthday parties or milestone events with pizza and candy and cupcakes. And it's hard for parents to even fathom going in a new direction. So what we want to explore tonight is how to take it in that new direction, to not take the status quo at face value. And for me as a parent, I know how important it is to be educated, to feel confident in my choices, and to have tricks up my sleeve for feeding and for all sorts of occasions. So I'm excited that we're here to bring this program out with a partnership of the 92nd Street Y. And I want to welcome here Katira Noviello-Kapoor, who is the Senior Director of Health Promotion, Wellness, and Athletics. Welcome, Katira.
Thank you, Lana. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dive into this important topic with wonderful experts in the field. Again, I am the creator and leader of the Spark Your Health initiative at the 92nd Street Y, which aims to support those interested in adopting a healthier lifestyle from all perspectives through educational talks and programs. So again, very excited to partner on this talk tonight. I think with the topic of plant-based nutrition within the family unit, the big questions that come up in our community is, how can busy parents make this a practical way of life? What recipes and tools can support a sustained effort and commitment to this type of meal plan? And are children truly getting all of the nutrients they require to grow and thrive from a plant-based diet? I know that much of this will be covered today in both Brenda's presentation and then followed by further discussion and Q&A, which will lean further into the practicality of this lifestyle approach. So I look forward to learning more with everyone and seeing you back soon for questions.
Thanks so much, Katira. So I have the honor of introducing our guests for tonight's program, Brenda Davis and Dr. Reshma Shah. We're going to start with Brenda sharing with us a wonderful presentation about plant-based nutrition for children, and then we'll transition into a Q&A with Dr. Shah. So a little bit about Brenda. Brenda is a registered dietitian. She is a trailblazer and an internationally acclaimed speaker in the field of plant-based nutrition. As a prolific writer, Brenda has authored or co-authored 13 books with nearly 1 million copies in print in 15 languages. Her latest book, Plant-Powered Protein, was released earlier this year, and just prior to that, she co-authored Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families with Dr. Shah. Brenda has also authored and co-authored numerous professional and lay articles and is a past chair of the Vegetarian Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So Dr. Reshma Shah is a board-certified pediatrician and co-author of the award-winning book Nourish, along with Brenda. She obtained her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Johns Hopkins University and her medical degree from Drexel University College of Medicine. Dr. Shah teaches for the Stanford Healthy Living Program and the Stanford University Pediatric Integrative Medicine Fellowship. She previously served as an affiliate clinical instructor at Stanford University School of Medicine, and she has received wonderful teaching awards. She currently serves as the co-director of the Learning Center for Plant-Based Juniors.
Okay, my presentation is called Nourishing Children with Plant-Based Diets. And I think everyone recognizes that adequate nutrition is necessary for the optimal growth and development of children. But while optimal growth and development are the #1 nutritional priorities during infancy and childhood, attention must also be paid to preventing the lifestyle-induced diseases that can take root in childhood and are responsible for most of the death and disability in the world today. When we look at overweight and obesity in children, we know it's escalating globally at a rapid rate, and 70 to 80% of adolescents that are obese will remain obese in adulthood. And childhood obesity is associated with metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, liver disorders, and lung disorders. And if we look at the rates of overweight and obesity among similar health conscious individuals consuming different dietary patterns, what we see is that the more plant-based a person goes, the lower their BMI tends to be. And this is a graph showing a study called the Adventist Health Study 2, and what you see in this study. And these, again, are similar health conscious individuals that are living healthy lifestyles. You can see that the only group that falls within the healthy BMI range of 18.5 to 24.9 are the people eating plant-exclusive diets, or the vegans. Even the vegetarians and pescatarians are above the healthy BMI range. Type 2 diabetes in children was rare 20 to 30 years ago. Rates are rapidly rising in this age group, and they mirror that of obesity. When type 2 diabetes begins in childhood, complications appear earlier and are more severe. We see, again, less type 2 diabetes among plant-based eaters. And this, again, is the Adventist Health Study 2. So we're looking at similar health-conscious individuals who exercise the same amount and who are very similar in their lifestyle practices. You can see in this particular study, non-vegetarians had a diabetes incidence of about 7.6%. It was 6.1 in semi-vegetarians, 4.8 in pescatarians, 3.2 in lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and 2.9% among the vegans in this study. And just for comparison, 13% of American adults have type 2 diabetes, and close to 50% have either type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. So you can see a dramatic difference among plant-based eaters. And heart disease begins early in life. Fatty streaks are actually found in the aorta of children younger than 3 years. And by the age of 10, nearly all kids have fatty streaks. And again, we see less heart disease among plant-based eaters. Vegetarians and vegans have about 25% less ischemic heart disease than similar health-conscious non-vegetarians. In terms of cancer rates have actually been rising steadily over the last several decades, with the largest increases reported in infants. And according to the US National Cancer Institute, overall cancer rates have increased 27% since 1975 in children under the age of 19 years. And again, we see less cancer among plant-based eaters compared to similar health-conscious meat eaters. Cancer rates in Epic Oxford, which is a study from the UK, were 11% lower among lacto-ovo-vegetarians and 19% lower among vegans. And in the Adventist Health Study 2, they were 8% lower among lacto-ovo-vegetarians and 16% lower among vegans. And if we look at the recommendations of the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research, they recommend that we eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and beans, and that we limit the consumption of fast foods and other processed foods high in fat, starches, or sugar, that we limit the consumption of sugar-sweetened drink, and that we limit the consumption of red and processed meat. And in fact, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen in the same category as asbestos and tobacco. And they categorized red meat as a group 2A or probable carcinogen in the same category as DDT and glyphosate. What we know is that plant-based kids tend to have higher quality diets. They eat more fruits, vegetables, and associated nutrients. They eat fewer sweets and salty snacks. They have lower intakes of total and saturated fat. And of course, as we already mentioned, they have a reduced risk of obesity. I want to move to talk about 3 core nutrition principles for growing children. And the first is we must promote optimal growth, development, and well-being. And this means ensuring adequate calories and macronutrients. We want to select healthful macronutrient sources. In other words, nutrient-dense foods rich in protective dietary components. We want to ensure adequate protein and essential fatty acids. And of course, we need to ensure adequate micronutrients or vitamins and minerals. We must pay attention to nutrients that could fall short in plant-based dietary patterns like vitamins B12, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and zinc. And we should use supplements when they are indicated. Core concept number 2 is to establish eating habits that support health through life and minimize the risk of chronic diseases. Eating patterns established in childhood profoundly impact food choices in adulthood, and plant-based diets tend to have higher diet quality scores. Number 3 is to nurture a healthy relationship with food. A healthy relationship with food can help to protect children from eating disorders and lifestyle-induced diseases. So practical pointers relating to these core concepts are, first, we want to make the foundation of the diet whole plant foods, emphasizing nutrient-dense choices in a variety of flavors, textures, and colors. We must ensure adequate calories, and that means providing regular meals plus snacks, especially for small children. We need to feed sufficient but not excessive fiber, and to include grains or starchy vegetables and legumes or tofu at most meals. We also need to include fat sources at each meal. So how much fat should we be providing for children? Well, we should be providing about 40% of calories from fat at age 1, and that will slowly be reduced to about 30 to 35% by age 3. We don't want to restrict high-fat whole foods such as avocados, tofu, nuts and seeds, or their milks, butters, or creams. We want to use concentrated fats and oils judiciously, as they can crowd out foods that provide iron, zinc, calcium, and other essential nutrients. We also need to select appropriate non-dairy milks. Starting at age 1, a full-fat fortified soy milk can be introduced. Soy milk actually has about the same amount of protein as cow's milk and more iron, so it's a really good choice. It's a little lower in fat, though. Other non-dairy milks can be introduced after 2 years of age. However, fortified soy milk is generally recommended due to its higher protein and nutrient content. We want to avoid rice milk, especially for children under 5, due to its possible arsenic content and its low nutrient content. We want to nurture a healthy relationship with food. And that means we want to honor our child's appetite, engage children in food selection at the market or grocery store and in the kitchen. We want to grow food with our kids, whether it's a garden or herbs on the patio or sprouts in a jar. We want to make family meals a real priority. This is extremely important because it protects our kids even as they grow up in their teen years. Keep the atmosphere positive and fun, and avoid the use of food as reward or punishment. We need to instill healthy habits by including a variety of wholesome, minimally processed foods. We should avoid short order cooking, limit highly processed fast foods and fried foods, minimize sugar sweetened beverages, and avoid being overly restrictive. Occasional treats, of course, are perfectly acceptable. It's very helpful to use a well-designed plant-based food guide. And of course, Nourish provides one such guide, which I think is particularly well-designed. And what we want to do is to choose a variety of foods from each food group to help ensure balanced, nutritious meals. And most meals should provide something from each group. And we need to be sure to include reliable sources of nutrients that may not be provided on this plate. And so we call those add-ons like EPA and DHA, vitamin B12, iodine, and vitamin D. And I want to very briefly talk about some of the nutrients of interest, including protein, omega-3s, B12, calcium, iron, and zinc. So first, protein. Do plant-based children consume enough protein? Well, just so you know, the North American RDA is about a gram of protein per kilogram body weight. It's about 0.85 for teens. The biggest studies we have looking at protein consumption in children eating a variety of dietary patterns are the VECCI studies from Germany. And in 1 to 3-year-old toddlers, all dietary groups, including the vegans, consumed over double the RDA. And in the 6 to 18-year-old children, all dietary groups exceeded the RDA. Omnivores had the highest intakes, but vegans still exceeded the RDA by about 20%. Ensuring sufficient intakes means including at least one protein-rich choice at each main meal and with some of the snacks. Excellent choices are soy foods like tofu, tempeh, edamame, or other soy foods, beans, lentils, or split peas, veggie meats in moderation, seitan, and then of course seeds, nuts, and their butters. The other thing that I think is important for children is to select some lower fiber protein-rich choices daily, like tofu, soy milk, nut or seed butters, and seitan. And it's also helpful to select higher protein non-dairy milks like soy or pea milk. Omega-3 fatty acids, do vegans and vegetarians get enough omega-3s? Well, alpha-linolenic acid, or the plant omega-3, we generally get similar or higher intakes, or have higher intakes than omnivores. But EPA and DHA are negligible in vegans beyond infancy unless microalgae supplements are used. And of course, in infancy, it comes from breast milk or formula fortified with DHA. We see low intakes in vegetarians depending on how many eggs they're consuming, because there is moderate amount of DHA in eggs. So from birth to 12 months, we see sufficient amounts in breast milk. The levels are higher in breast milk if the mother gets direct sources of EPA and DHA or formula fortified with DHA. So how much do we need beyond 12 months? Well, ALA, the AI, or acceptable intakes, range between 0.7 and 1.6 grams a day, depending on age, more for older children. And for those who consume no EPA and DHA, I would recommend doubling that to 1.4 to 3.2 grams a day. But EPA and DHA, I think, are very well advised. We're looking at 70 to 160 milligrams per day, depending on age, and that can come from a microalgae-based supplement. Boosting omega-3s means incorporating ALA-rich seeds like ground flax, ground chia, and hemp seeds in the diet, or walnuts, or their butters, creams, oils, and adding a microalgae-based EPA and DHA supplement. Vitamin B12, we know that plant foods come up short on B12. Plant foods are just simply not reliable B12 sources unless they're fortified. Vegans who do not use supplements and or consume B12 fortified foods will eventually become deficient. And deficiency will occur much more rapidly in infants and children as their stores are lower than they are in adults. So we need to be sure of B12. Mothers who are breastfeeding must ensure a daily reliable B12 source. Formula, of course, contains B12. Once breastfeeding or formula feeding slows or stops, plant-based infants and children must be provided with reliable sources of vitamin B12. So what are reliable sources? Supplements, of course, are the most reliable sources. B12 fortified foods like fortified non-dairy milks, and animal products for lacto-ovo vegetarians or for plant predominant families. So how much B12 is recommended? Well, the North American RDA ranges from about 1 to 2 micrograms during childhood, about 2.4 during the teen years. If we're doing 1 dose a day, we're looking at between about 10 and 50 to 100 micrograms. And if we're doing twice a week dosing, it would range from 250 micrograms to 1,000 micrograms. And the reason these are so much higher than the RDA is because we only absorb a small fraction of what we take in a supplement. Calcium, how much do we need? Well, it's about 700 milligrams for toddlers, about 1,000 to 48-year-olds, and 9 years of age or older, it's 1,300. So these are pretty high recommendations for calcium, actually higher than a lot of other countries. If we look at actual intakes in veggie, the intakes were just over 400 for omnivores, around 400 for lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and closer to 300 for vegans. But all dietary groups were well below the RDA. With vegans having the lowest intakes. So how can we ensure sufficient calcium without dairy products? Number one, by including calcium-rich plant foods and calcium-fortified foods several times a day, and by being aware of factors that can impact calcium absorption. So we need to eat sufficient calcium-rich plant foods, and the most calcium-rich plant foods are low oxalate greens. High oxalate greens like spinach, Swiss chard, and beet greens are not good sources of calcium. Even though the calcium that is there, we don't absorb much of it. Things like chia seeds, almonds, and sesame tahini are reasonable sources. Legumes like black beans, great northern beans, or other white beans, and tofu made with calcium are excellent sources. And then other things like figs and blackstrap molasses can also provide calcium. Calcium fortified non-dairy milks and other foods with added calcium can be very important additions to the diet if we are to meet the RDA for calcium. So it's easier to meet the RDA, of course, when we include at least 2 servings of calcium fortified non-dairy milk or other calcium fortified foods in the diet. And we want to be aware of factors that can impact calcium absorption. So excessive oxalates or phytates can have a negative impact. Excessive sodium can have a negative impact. Vitamin D, of course, has a very positive impact. So vitamin D, we generally don't get enough from sunshine. Most people would be well advised to take a supplement. And that is generally recommended. We'll talk about how much in a couple of minutes. Iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency in childhood, and the risk is greatest in infants and preschoolers. And iron deficiency lowers cognitive and motor function, which can persist beyond childhood. It also impairs immune function. Now, if we look at intakes in children, we can see from veggie that non-vegetarians are consuming about 6 milligrams of iron a day, lacto-ovo-vegetarians around 7, and vegans around 9. Now, so vegans are actually consuming more, but in fact, the absorption from plant foods is lower. So some studies suggest a somewhat higher risk. Now, we can ameliorate that by maximizing iron status, selecting iron-rich foods from within each food group, moderating our intake of iron absorption inhibitors like phytates in wheat bran, by eating iron-rich foods with iron absorption enhancers such as vitamin C-rich foods, garlic and onions and carotenoids can all help, and by replacing meat with legumes rather than dairy, because dairy is low in iron and it inhibits the absorption of iron. And finally, zinc. Zinc absorption can be significantly lower from plant foods, especially if foods are higher in phytates. And inadequate zinc intakes are associated with impaired immune function and in severe cases, stunted growth in children. So how much zinc is needed? Well, it's about 3 to 5 milligrams. In young children, you can see the upper limit is not that much higher, so we need to be aware of that. And then it ranges from about 8 to 11 in older children and teens. and there's a more generous upper limit at this stage. So how do we boost zinc? Well, we want to limit the use of very high phytate foods, use food preparation techniques that reduce phytates. Soaking, sprouting, leavening, yeasting, cooking can all reduce phytates. Ensure sufficient calories with regular nutritious snacks. Consider multivitamins with zinc, and include zinc-rich foods like legumes, oats, nuts, and seeds at each meal. And finally, supplements for plant-based children can be very valuable. So 10 to 15 micrograms of vitamin D, if insufficient, is coming from food, which it generally is. Vitamin B12, 10 to 100 micrograms a day, or 250 to 1,000 micrograms twice a week. Iodine, 90 to 150 micrograms a day, if insufficient, is coming from food. And 70 to 160 milligrams of EPA and DHA is also advised. It's optional, but I think well advised. And then we can also use a multivite. It's optional, but may be helpful in meeting nutritional needs for some nutrients, such as iron and zinc, for example. Liquid supplements are recommended for toddlers, and chewable are suitable for children. In summary, well-designed plant-based diets are safe and appropriate for grown children. Like all diets for children, they do need to be appropriately planned. And this is our book, Nourish, our websites, and our Instagram links. And I will stop my share and open it up to questions.
Wow, just perfect timing.
Oh, good.
Thank you for that. That was just so much valuable information. And so now what I'd like to do is kind of weave in some questions that will bring it back to how do we incorporate this into our daily life, which I think a lot of families out there are probably curious about. So I'm glad that we have the science behind it, and we have the appropriate amounts of vitamins and supplements that we need to be looking at. So I want to start with the picky eater, because as much as it would be wonderful that we could put down a plate of all of the wonderful foods that you mentioned and our children would just consume it with a smile on their face, the truth is that, some of us probably have children that don't want to eat what you put in front of them, no matter what it is. So just, curious if you have any tactics or maybe specific meals that you've found success with, and making sure that that picky eater is still having a solid meal, because we want to make sure they're going to bed, with a full tummy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just have a lot of compassion for families. I'm a parent myself, and so I know firsthand what the struggles at the table can look like. And, these are issues that affect not just plant-based families, vegan and vegetarian families, but really families that eat a variety of diets. And I think the first thing is to create a structure of warmth and to make mealtime sort of a comfortable environment for children. Because I think what I've discovered from seeing my own patients and from taking care of patients is that children can pick up on parents' anxiety. So when you feel overly stressed about what your child is eating, your child is going to feel that. So I think the first thing is sort of setting the stage, making it sort of a calm and pleasant eating environment. And then just, I think that our job as parents is to offer children a variety of foods, to create an environment where they feel comfortable to try them, and then just allow them to do the rest. So offer them repeated exposures, and sometimes adding things like a dip or a sauce or preparing things in a different way can really help to make kids feel more comfortable. I think one of the things that people underestimate the most often is, I find that oftentimes parents have to model the behavior too. So if you're a parent that doesn't enjoy vegetables, I think it's kind of hard to expect your kid to enjoy vegetables. So model the behavior you want your kids to see. And then the final thing I'll say about picky eating is that for some families, it really is a struggle beyond, just not trying a new food. And it might be impacting the child's growth, the child's overall well-being. So if a parent feels that the picky eating is really interfering either with the family enjoyment of meal times or the child's growth or development, I think it's really important to discuss this with your healthcare provider, because sometimes further intervention may be required. But in general, I say create a warm environment, offer foods multiple times, and try not to pressure kids into trying new foods.
Fantastic. So many gems of wisdom in there. So kind of sticking with the meal planning theme, can you give some meal planning tips? Because it's clear that going plant-based with our families is possible, but it does take some strategic planning, it sounds like, when it comes to preparing the meals, maybe a week in advance, especially making sure that you have a wide variety of foods available. So if you could speak to the strategy behind the meal plan a little bit.
So Brenda, maybe I'll share a few of mine and then I'll let you share a few of yours.
Sure.
But what I find is every family is going to find, the system that works best for them. But in our family, what I find is having some idea of what the menu is going to look like for the week. So I'm not constantly running to the grocery store. So I typically do my menu planning and my grocery shopping on the same day. I enlist my kids. I got in the habit of asking them, what are your wishes for the week? And when I gave them some involvement in sort of deciding what was going to be happening for dinner, they were more excited about, oh, today's the night that I pick dinner. And then I think, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. Pick the things that your family already enjoys, if it's pasta night or taco night or, burrito bowls or whatever it is, and just try to sort of reimagine them with a plant focus. And so instead of doing a chicken stir fry, you might do a tofu stir fry. Instead of doing, pasta with a meat sauce, I'm surprised at how much my kids enjoy a pasta with like a lentil bolognese. So you use lentils in place of meat, ground meat for the protein. So I think, do a little bit of planning and prepping and then just reimagine your family favorites.
Mm-hmm. And what I would add is one of the things that I found really helpful as a parent was to prepare grains and beans in a fairly large quantity so that they were always there in the fridge, and it just makes putting together a bowl or something like that super easy. So all you have to do is steam your veggies, and also sauces, to always have healthy salad dressings and healthy sauces like a peanut lime sauce or something like that handy, so that meals can come together very quickly. And I love the idea of involving children in the planning of meals and also in the selection of the foods. It just makes such a difference. The growing of the foods, the selecting at the market, whatever it is, they take some ownership when that happens. Get excited about the foods that are being prepared as well.
I love that. Thank you. All good suggestions. So now let's shift to talking about the transition to the plant-based diet for a family that maybe is not quite there yet. Do you have recommendations for families that are looking to make that transition? Do you suggest easing into it, or is it, one day we're making the switch? And, Brenda, you alluded to this a little bit, but, how do we make that conversation with our children fun? How do we get them excited about the transition that we're going on, or do we do it in more of a sneaky way?
Well, I can start off as I definitely vote no on the sneaky, because kids are too smart for that. So I have a strong feeling about not trying to be overtly sneaky. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't, sort of mix vegetables into different dishes and stuff in a very open way. I think that the answer to that question is really going to depend on a lot of factors. It's going to depend on, if the other adults in the household are on the same page. So if you have a partner and they are in agreement with making this change, it's going to be a lot easier. But if they're resistant, that might mean something different. And the other thing I think is really important to consider is the age of the child. So for a younger child, you may not have to have a lot of complicated conversations because they don't really have a lot of a say into, the grocery shopping and things. But as children get older, and especially teenagers, they might have a lot of strong feelings about not wanting to change the way that they're eating. And so I think let your child's resistance or acceptance kind of guide your pace. If you have children that are curious, that are eager, I think you can go much more quickly. But if you have children, especially older children that are resistant, I think it's important for you to make the changes to your own plate, to ask for respect, to leave the door open for conversation, but to sort of have a lot of understanding and patience, because I think if someone came charging in telling me that I had to change entirely the way that I ate, I wouldn't feel very good about that. So I think have compassion in your conversation, make it age appropriate, and if all else fails and you're meeting a lot of resistance, I think the strategy, and I luckily did not meet a lot of resistance in my own family, but I think if you are meeting a lot of resistance, I think the best way forward is to make delicious plant-based foods available. And I think the more that they tried it, the more that they enjoy it, the more likely they are to make stepwise changes. So I think each family is going to go at a pace that feels comfortable for them. And I think you always want to lead with compassion, because you never know, like they might, I mean, my family was not all on board all at once, but gradually they sort of all came on board. And I think it was because they didn't feel a lot of pressure to do it.
Thank you. Brenda, did you have anything to add?
I just think Reshma said it so perfectly. I completely agree. When we made the transition, my kids were 4 and 1, so it was a lot easier. I remember my daughter still wanting to have some sort of salmon in her sandwiches for a while, and it lasted for about a year, and then she didn't want it anymore. But we really did leave it up to them, and we also told them that, you know, this is the way we're eating in our home now. But when you're out at a friend's house or whatever, that decision is yours. You decide what you want to eat. And eventually, of course, they really own being, you know, their choices. And I can remember my son at the age of 4 being at a friend's house and eating pork. And when he came home and asked me what kind of animal it was, he was just, I mean, he literally collapsed and cried for 2 hours and never did it again. So when they own it themselves, I think it's really valuable.
That's a great point. So we talked a little bit about having a wide variety of foods available. And I'd imagine to some families transitioning into plant-based, or even those that are already on the plant-based journey, there might be certain foods that we overlook. I think, you know, busy families, we have a tendency to have the same grocery shopping list over and over again. We get into habits. So, you know, in your work, are there any foods kind of unique that you think us, you know, families may be overlooking that we should maybe be adding to our grocery list to make it a fun experience for children?
Well, I think that one of the things that I really have underestimated is the power of a farmer's market. And I think the farmer's markets, if you have access to one, really dictates, you know, what we eat in terms of seasons. And so my kids have tried a lot of new fruits and vegetables just by being exposed to them. And especially if you have a farmer's market like ours, where they offer samples and things, it's an opportunity and invitation to try new vegetables like kohlrabi or different types of greens. I also think like nuts and seeds, I think oftentimes are underutilized. I know Brenda has told me often that she has like a selection that she keeps in her freezer. But I think if you have those things on hand, sprinkling them on oatmeal or salads, things like that. So I think nuts and seeds, trying different vegetables, and don't forget about using frozen fruits and vegetables. I've gotten in the habit of always having a few bags of frozen veggies in the freezer. And so nights where I feel like, you know, there's nothing to eat, I can always whip up a quick dinner because I know I've got some, you know, if I've got a can of beans and some frozen vegetables, I can make a dinner out of almost nothing.
And the other thing that I would suggest, which my kids found quite fun, is to do ethnic meals and introduce them to the foods of different countries. And it just makes it more exciting trying new things. So, you know, you have one night that's, you know, an Asian, whether it's Thai or Chinese or whatever. You can do an African meal, you can do an Indian meal, you can do South American, you know, the beans and rice and so on. And it just, I think it just opens them up to different flavors and that helps them to appreciate the food of a variety of cultures.
I love that idea of themed nights. That's fantastic. So let's shift into fortified foods. Are fortified foods okay for kids, or should we be opting for items with the least amount of ingredients?
Yeah, and I think Brenda definitely covered this in her talk. I'm a huge fan of fortified foods. I think, especially if you've got a child that's a bit more selective, that they're in, and especially for toddlers when the intakes can vary dramatically from day to day. I think for certain nutrients, especially calcium, a fortified plant-based milk can absolutely help children to meet their calcium needs. So I'm a huge fan of fortified foods. Especially for calcium and iron, which are two nutrients that can be kind of tricky for kids, especially younger kids, toddlers.
And people do have to remember that, you know, we've for years fortified foods for omnivorous families because sort of a deficit of whether it was vitamin D that we added to milk or iodine added to salt or iron and folate or folic acid added to flour. We've added nutrients to fill gaps for people, for public health initiatives for years. It's no different for plant-based eaters as well. We can fill the gaps quite nicely with some fortified foods. And to be honest, it's really hard to get 1,300 milligrams of calcium into a 9 or 10-year-old not using any fortified foods. It's just very difficult.
All right, so I'll ask one last question to be respectful. I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A with the audience, with Leanna. So now let's just say the family is on the journey, they're going plant-based, and they're meeting some resistance, perhaps from, friends, from family, perhaps even their pediatrician. So do you have any tips and kind of strength building tips for a family that's tiptoeing into this, but is maybe not being welcomed from people in their lives?
And then maybe I'll take the pediatrician question and you can take the friends and family part of it. So as far as your pediatrician, since I have been sort of in this nutrition space, I've been really surprised at the number of parents who have come to me saying, our pediatrician really isn't on board. Does this mean I need to find a new pediatrician? We really are interested in this way of eating. And I think the first thing I tell parents is to just take a breath and ask themselves, do you have a good relationship with your pediatrician? Do you feel comfortable talking to your pediatrician about other things like ear infections or vaccinations or whatever the case may be? And if the answer to that question is yes, I feel very comfortable with my pediatrician, we've had good care, then I think it's really important to have specific conversations about what their concerns might be. Because I find that most pediatricians that are resistant to vegetarian and vegan diets, it's because they have the overall health and well-being of the child in mind. So you can ask them about, first educate yourself about, the nutrients that your kids may need and supplements that they may need, and then ask your pediatrician specifically, what are you worried about? The biggest place of resistance is often dairy, because pediatricians often believe that dairy foods are necessary to meet calcium intakes and because they're protein. And I think that if you can share with your pediatrician that you're using a fortified soy milk and it has as much calcium as a glass of milk, as much vitamin D as a glass of cow's milk, oftentimes, their concerns are alleviated. So if you have a good relationship with your pediatrician, ask them specifically of what concerns they have. If your child is growing well and they're on the appropriate supplements, I think one sort of compromise could be if that there is some concerns about growth or certain nutrients, you could agree together that to meet with a dietitian that's experienced with plant-based diets to ensure that your child is getting, all the nutrients that they need. If, however, you feel like this plant-based diet thing is just one of many things that you're not agreeing with your pediatrician about, that's the time that it might be worth finding a different pediatrician. And your pediatrician doesn't necessarily have to be plant-based. It's always great when they are, but if they aren't, I think the most important thing is to find a pediatrician that you feel hears you, addresses your concerns, and that you feel comfortable having a conversation with. So you don't have to find a new pediatrician, but just have a conversation and see how it goes.
And to add for friends and family, I think we need to remember that for friends and family, it's all about wanting to be connected with us, a connection in our culture and in most cultures is really largely about sharing food and sharing experiences. And all of a sudden, we're not sharing the same food. It's really concerning to our families. So one of the things that I think is important is just to be really respectful, share wonderful food, make plant-based versions of whatever meal they're serving so that you can still eat together. And I do this all the time with my family members that are still omnivores. Even, Christmas dinner, they do their turkey, we do our tofu turkey, which is a kind of a stuffed molded tofu creation, and it's wonderful. And then we share all of the other, side dishes. And so I think it can be done, but just be gentle. It's really all about not wanting to lose a connection with you.
Well, thank you both so much for that. And I think with that, we'll shift to Leanna and questions from the audience.
Thank you, Katira. This has been a great conversation so far. I wanted to start by bringing forward Diana's question. She has asked, if children don't eat the vegetables that parents are preparing, is it okay for them to eat fruit instead? And so I think the question is, what's the nutritional difference here, and what do we need to be mindful of?
Yeah, so I think that fruits are definitely very nutritious, and it's okay to offer kids fruits. But I think with the vegetables, I would just say don't give up so quickly. Keep offering them, offer them in different ways. I remember the first time that I made roasted broccoli, it's like my kids' minds were blown. Like they were, you serve broccoli that's been roasted with a little garlic, with a little lemon juice, and it's delicious. So don't be afraid to offer your kids fruit. But I think don't give up on offering vegetables. You want to do as much of a variety and, eat the rainbow, all those sorts of things. And I think just keep trying with the vegetables. Make sure you're enjoying vegetables in front of your children too. Because if they see you eating a snap pea, and like Brenda's mentioned so many times, like when you grow these things, they're going to want to try them as well.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that I would add is that if you're serving Brussels sprouts and your kids hate Brussels sprouts, one of the things that I often did as a parent was before dinner, they're starved, I would make a plate of raw veggies and it would disappear. So it didn't matter if they ate the Brussels sprouts, they'd already eaten an entire plate of peppers and broccoli and cauliflower and everything else. So that's something that you can do, is just as an after school snack or a before dinner little entree or a little appetizer. That works very well. I was fortunate. My kids loved all vegetables. And part of it is, like Reshma said, is with the way you just changing preparation. So I remember one day my daughter, she was about 9 years old, was asking what she could have for a snack. And I said, well, look in the fridge. And she found a bunch of spinach and she said, well, can I have the spinach? I said, sure. She got out the frying pan, cooked it up with fresh garlic, and she's sitting at her plate and pouring, she's got a fresh cut lemon and she's squeezing lemon juice on top. And my son, 6 years old, comes walking up the stairs and he looks at her and he goes, is that spinach? And she said, yes. And he said, well, can I have some? And she said, no, I'm eating the last batch. And he burst into tears. And so I think often with kids, it's about really making these foods taste wonderful and getting excited about ways of preparing it and teaching them to prepare the foods themselves as well.
That's incredible. I love that story, Brenda. I was just sitting with my 6-year-old yesterday evening, and we got green beans for the first time in a few months. And we brought them out and she just, like, her eyes lit up. She's like, oh, that's awesome. She was ready for it because it had been a little while. And I find for my kids, if you give them a little space, like make something disappear for a while and then bring it back, suddenly the novelty of it captures their attention again. But to each his own. I think that's really great. I'm also really curious for parents who are relying on school food. In the New York City area, we actually have such wonderful leadership in offering plant-based meals in our schools, not every day, but certainly, with regularity. And for those who are in communities where this is not a thing, this is not a priority yet, let's say yet, we'll be optimistic. What do you suggest that public school parents or parents in any school that may be providing meals, what do you suggest they do?
I think, to be perfectly honest, this is a very, very challenging thing. I've experienced this with my own kids, and I think to move a school system is an enormous task. There's a lot of different players in terms of where the funding is coming from, the budgets and things like that. So, like, the easiest answer, which I know is not always an option for parents, but if there's no possibility for your child to get the kinds of foods that they want or that they need at school, I think the simplest thing is to pack your own lunch, which of course is not an option for a lot of families. I think the next thing is, just being the squeaky wheel at these school board meetings and things like that. I think more and more schools are offering vegetarian and vegan options, but there is still a lot of work to do in this realm. I think it is a burden that parents are still facing. And the simplest answer, which again, I know is not accessible to a lot of families, is to be packing lunches. And if you are packing lunches, I think it's perfectly reasonable to get your kids to help in that effort. Because I can't tell you the number of parents that say that, packing school lunch is like probably the most stressful part of their day, because it doesn't stop. It's day after day after day.
Absolutely. Brenda, do you have any insights? I know your kids have grown up, but now with grandchildren in the mix, do you see any new movement or new ideas coming forward? I'm so curious about what's happening in Canada, where the plant-powered plate is sort of a feature, right? It's part of the dietary guidelines.
Yeah, we need to get it operationalized because we have a wonderful food guide, but it's not being used to the extent it needs to be yet. But we don't have school lunches per se in Canada. Kids bring their own lunches. There are some special days where it may be a pizza day or something like that. But we parents, all of us pack our kids' lunches. That's just, how it is here. So, but I must say, kudos to the New York folks that have made such inroads. It's just so impressive what's happened there. And I think that you are inspiring people everywhere that, it's possible. And so they just need to keep moving forward, even if it's just little baby steps, like adding an extra vegetable to the plate or whatever it is. I mean, we really should be offering plant-based options in all schools across the entire country, but that's not the reality yet, but it can be. And we just need to keep moving forward.
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to talk about a slightly difficult topic because this comes up often. Frankly, for me as a parent raising plant-based kids, I had a lot of concern from loved ones around creating disordered eating in my children. And thankfully, I don't see that after 6 or 7 years of making this transition to plant-based eating. But what do we know about disordered eating, and how can we mindfully direct our children toward healthy choices and sort of do it in a way that will help them to feel positive relationships with food?
Yeah, and I think it's a very legitimate concern. And I think one of the things that Brenda and I really try to emphasize in our work together is to create an environment where there isn't this sort of good food, bad food, or demonizing foods. I think that when we use that kind of language, our children can definitely pick up on it. And I don't think it's like a healthy way of eating. I think that a healthy, our goal as parents really is not to get them to eat 1 more bite of broccoli or 2 more bites of tofu. Our goal as parents is really to promote their health and to teach them to eat in a way that's going to be able to sustain them in the long run. And eating should be joyful. It should be enjoyable. It should be pleasant. And so you want to create sort of a balanced approach. And I think oftentimes some of these more highly restrictive diets that might be appropriate for adults with specific conditions such as heart disease and type 2 diabetes are not appropriate for children. So I think that children don't need to be on a no fat, no sugar, no salt diet. I think it's not the way that is going to create sort of balance and enjoyment around food. And at the same time, I think you can balance it in a way so that the majority of the foods that you're serving day in and day out are sort of in that realm of the plate that Brenda shared with you in terms of incorporating fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains. I think that sometimes parents get so focused on that cupcake at a birthday party or that, treat at grandma's house or whatever it might be. And that's sort of losing the bigger goal, the bigger picture of creating balance, enjoyment, while also providing them with a healthy and balanced diet. So I think offer all the kinds of foods. If you go out for ice cream, whether, vegan ice cream or whatever, enjoy it. And you don't have to stress too much about labeling it as a treat food or a junk food, or kids pick up on that. And I think the best way that we can sort of shield our kids against disordered eating is to sort of have a healthy relationship with food and to foster that at our dinner table, at our conversations, and the way that we interact with them with food. So I really believe that you don't want to be overly restrictive with kids when it comes to food.
No, and I think it's also worth mentioning that, there are a higher number of vegetarians or vegans in that you know, when you look at people with disordered eating, the numbers of vegetarians and vegans are high, but a lot of those individuals are what we call pseudo-vegetarians, people that have become vegetarian after developing an eating disorder as a means of justifying further restriction in their diet. And in fact, most of the studies that have looked at this have not found a higher incidence of eating disorders in plant-based children or adolescents or adults for that matter.
That's so helpful. Thank you. I want to close out the Q&A with a focus that actually brings us out of the personal health sphere and into environmental health. Brenda, you deal with this so beautifully in your newer book, Plant-Powered Protein. And I think it's actually really, I think it's powerful for older kids. I have a 13-year-old, and I know we have some viewers here tonight who have some older folks at home, older kids at home, and they may not be drawn to a health rationale for making changes to their diet, but they may be drawn to issues of climate change and environment. So what would you tell parents to equip them with some language to share the reasons for choosing plant protein over animal protein?
Well, maybe I'll just say one quick thing about the climate, and then Brenda, I want to hear more about what you have to say from your book. But I think that climate change is one of the biggest motivating factors for young people, and it's one of the things that gives me hope is their dedication to it. I've worked a lot with medical students and residents, and they are so they're so just dedicated to creating solutions around climate change. And I think the connection between climate and food, between climate, food, health, and equity, these are things that adolescents and young adults, it's front of mind for them. And so I think that can be a really powerful way for a family to sort of center their values at the dinner table. And if your children come to you with conversations about climate change, I think it's really important to talk to them in age-appropriate ways, because you don't want to create eco-anxiety and alarm and talk to them about things that are going to give them nightmares. But at the same time, it's a really beautiful way to engage your children in a conversation about something that most definitely will impact their life. And I think for me, it really doesn't matter if people are coming at this from the climate angle, because eventually they understand, wait, it's good for the planet and it's good for me. It's like a win-win, and for the animals. And so it just becomes a win-win-win. So for me, the conversations, the intersection between food, health, and climate change is just one of the most powerful conversations you can have. So I think it's wonderful to engage kids. I just encourage parents to do it in a very age-appropriate way so that it doesn't become, I think sometimes in our zest and our zeal to share this information, you don't want to introduce things that are going to be frightening for children, especially for young children. But absolutely, I love it when families have these kinds of conversations at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm. And the book, Plant-Powered Protein, the section on the environment was actually written by my son, Corey, and really proud of the work that he did for that chapter. Basically, what we know is that when we look at not just greenhouse gas emissions, but when we look at greenhouse gas emissions, the amount of carbon dioxide produced per kilogram of food, animal products have far greater greenhouse gas emissions than plant products, and with meat like red meat being at the very top of the scale. So I think that is useful information, but it's also useful to recognize that it's not even just about greenhouse gas emissions. It's about land use. It's about water use. It's about soil. It's about many aspects of environmental protection. And so I think just eating lower on the food chain. I can remember when I first became a plant-based eater myself, which was about 35 or 36 years ago. And I can remember saying to my husband, we lived in Northern Ontario. We didn't ever know any real vegetarians. And I asked him if he'd be willing to become completely vegetarian. And what he said to me was, I would love to. I learned in environmental sciences that eating lower on the food chain was the best thing you could do for preserving this planet. And so I think that it's a really important point.
Thank you so much. I love how we connect the dots, how we bring values into the conversations in our homes around how we eat. So I really appreciate all of your wisdom and your time this evening or this afternoon for you on the West Coast. And I want to sort of bring us to a close first by calling out for those parents who are interested in more resources. Dr. Shah and Brenda have created a course on plant-based nutrition for kids, which you're welcome to look at. It's through the Plant-Based Juniors website that you can access it, and I'm putting the link in the comments for everybody to take a look at. And we invite anyone who's here who might be newer to the conversation to explore more of the resources that the 92nd Street Wise Spark Your Health program and PlantPowered Metro New York have respectively organized on topics that really are for many, many ages. So I'm again sharing the link for Spark Your Health. And coming up in PlantPowered Metro New York's calendar, we are entering a quieter period as the year comes to a close. But in the new year, we are going to be bringing back our 21-day PlantPowered Jumpstart program, which is an opportunity for those of you who may be really curious about what it means to live a healthy plant-based lifestyle, how to incorporate it into your lives. We're going to be running that program starting in mid-January, and it is a guided learning experience and dietary change program that extends over a month with peer mentorship and many resources included. So we invite you to learn more about that on our website. I want to bring back Katira to join me as we say goodbye to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Katira, for being a wonderful partner in this.
And right back at you. Thank you so much for the collaboration, and we look forward to more programs, like you said, in 2024.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.